Why must parents step out and have these conversations? Because we must be children's authority. We want to be the ones that they turn to. If we're not available, they'll go to Google or they'll ask Siri or they'll ask Alexa or they'll ask a friend, and you don't necessarily want them getting answers to questions like where do babies come from or how are babies made from those types of resources, if I can call them that.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, I want to look at something that I heard on a podcast. It's the podcast Not Gonna Lie with Kylie Kelsey. Now, Kylie Kelsey is a mother, and she's the wife of Jason Kelsey, who was a former NFL player and now really a pop star, if you want to call him that. He's got his own podcast and a podcast with his brother Travis Kelsey, who happens to be dating and engaged to Taylor Swift. Kylie is the mother of 4 daughters, though, and she has daughters that range from 1 to 6, and really has this interesting approach to explaining how babies are made. She talked about it on her podcast recently, and she says this, quote, "Yikes. I have been asked by both of my older children how babies get in your belly or how babies get here. And my answer right now is always the same. When 2 people love each other enough, their love gets them a baby." She goes on to explain, Dr. Kathy, that she likes this explanation because it opens up the opportunity to answer this for plenty of situations, including less traditional situations. And she kind of highlights how this can help navigate those things easily when they come up. She goes on to say that she is fascinated by explaining the anatomical parts that make up having a baby. And she highlights this in her podcast using actual terms for the organs and all of that stuff. And it's really funny in the podcast. She says that she's just fascinated, which I love that word, partly because I think it's something that we talk about here at the podcast and at Celebrate Kids is like a genius quality. It's a quality that makes us wonder and for us to step back in awe and almost in a way really respect the dynamic design that things have in a way that is, I would say, and sometimes kind of supernatural. No, I don't want to say that she's worshiping those parts or anything like that, but I think that that idea of being fascinated by and wonder is super interesting. And especially because I think when we talk about reproduction, it can kind of feel like you're stepping out on a skating rink. And you don't do this a lot in Texas, but I do it a lot here in Minnesota, right? And what I've learned about walking on a skating rink is the first time you do it, it really is awe-inspiring. You look at the ground and you're thinking, I'm walking on water and this is amazing. And then you start to feel it. And as your foot slides across the ice, you feel very unsteady. And the world before stepping on the skating rink is not the world of stepping on the skating rink. But the more that you do it, the easier it becomes and the more confident you get. And you can kind of now move across the skating rink with purpose and with function and form. And if I want to use all those terms just to help kind of get that picture, it's just kind of fun. I love it. But the first few times you step out onto it, you're kind of looking and saying, man, the ground's moving. And sometimes we even stumble. I think that sometimes having this conversation with our kids about where babies come from can feel like that. We step on the skating rink and it feels really slippery. Why do you think it's important for parents to kind of step out onto this proverbial skating rink and to have these conversations with our kids, kind of like Kylie is having with her kids right now? Why should parents have these conversations?
Great analogy. I have rich memories of skating rinks growing up in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. Why must parents step out and have these conversations? Because we must be children's authority. We want to be the ones that they turn to. If we're not available, they'll go to Google or they'll ask Siri or they'll ask Alexa or they'll ask a friend, and you don't necessarily want them getting answers to questions like where do babies come from or how are babies made from those types of resources, if I can call them that. We want to be the ones that they turn to. We need to be available. And you and I know, Wayne, that parents don't have to know everything. You need to be as prepared as you can. In fact, I would say, I'm glad we're talking about this because I would say that if you're married, get on the same page with your spouse and know how you're going to answer the question when you're asked. You will be asked at some point. When the neighbor has a baby, your kids are going to be curious about babies. When your sister has a baby and they have a new cousin, they're going to be curious. So be ready, or you might conceive and they're going to be wondering. So be ready. How would you answer it? What will you say? What won't you say? Be ready so that you tell the truth, because to lie is not healthy, and you want to be ready. You don't have to know it all, but you want to be ready. And it's okay, Wayne, to say to our kids, "Oh, let me think about that a minute." Like, it is okay for you to say that. Let the kids know that you value them so much that you don't want to mislead, and it's going to take you a minute to get your thoughts together.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Dr. Kathy, especially because of the way that Kylie kind of talks about how she answers this with her kids. Because it does get to that place where you almost wonder a little bit if she is lying. Because the hard part of this is that she kind of says that love creates babies. And I'm just going to say that's not always true. I mean, I want to be careful how I say that, though, right? Because
Right.
the love of God does create us, and God is a good God that who creates us on purpose, with a purpose, for a purpose. There is nobody that was created accidentally, and there is nobody that was not created with the love of God, right? So
That's really good.
primarily, if I took it up the chain, I would say 100% she's right on. Love does create babies. But when she's talking about the actual act, it could make my daughter never want to love anybody, especially like
Mhm.
in her class right now, because she's afraid that they might create a baby in her. I'm just taking it to this degree because I do have one child that is incredibly logic smart, like maybe to a fault. And so for her, it would be this place of, oh no, now I'm going to get pregnant because mom said love creates babies. But I
Exactly.
think it also goes to another place where I think is really the reason that Kylie answers this way. And that's this idea that two men who are in a relationship because they love each other, that they would naturally create a baby. Or if two women were in a relationship and they love each other, that they would naturally create a baby. That doesn't work like that. They have to have incredible interventions, spend an incredible amount of money to try to intervene into the fact that their relationship is not going to be procreative. So I want to ask you this a little bit because I've talked about one lighthearted example of why this is problematic and one that's really serious and pretty heavy. What does it do for our kids when we answer this in a way that does bring in things that actually aren't true in the physical world? How does that impact our kids?
Such a profound question. And I want to say to all of our listeners, if you yourself have done this, it is okay. Like, we get it. You need to, though, then back up and potentially apologize for misleading them, potentially even ask for forgiveness if you feel like you were sinning against them by not caring enough for them in that moment. This is really important to consider. I love what you were saying about God. I would encourage our listeners to share with their kids that God's love is what causes all of this to happen. But man, we can't mislead. Confusion does not lead to truth or the application of good ideas, which would be the definition of wisdom. We're just going to cause more questions. Love does not always result in a baby. There's infertility, there's God's design and his timing, of course. And, I'm thinking as I was just doing a little bit of prep for this, you gave me a little bit of time today, hugging and kissing, right? What if kids think that, well, mommy and daddy love each other because they hug and they kiss and they touch? What if they think that touching is what causes babies? No, this is dangerous. They might be afraid to love because they don't want a baby created. They might not understand. So there's something more that we can say here beyond simply love.
I love that, Dr. Kathy. And I think that that gets to the reality of what I kind of expect you to say every time I ask you this question, which is, well, that depends. It depends on how old the
Mhm.
kid is. It depends on
Yeah.
their, emotional maturity. It depends on a lot of different things. And so we have to have situational awareness on how, I don't know if it's like even graphic, because it's natural for us to say to a 1 year old or a 2 year old when they ask us these questions. I don't know if a 1 year old would ask these questions, but a
Mhm.
2 year old might, or a 3 year old
Yeah.
would get to this place where they would say, where does baby come from? Because they're learning more about the world. And for us to say, well, love creates babies, and you're not wrong. But I want to get to this place, though, where we do have to kind of get to this place where we introduce this to kids. Is it important for younger kids to know that love doesn't always make babies, right? Do they need
Yeah.
more mechanics, especially for younger kids, than just love?
I love this phrase, situational awareness, because you're exactly right. It does depend on the situation. Why is your child curious? How old is the child? How emotionally mature are they? Et cetera, et cetera. I do like that she does use the actual names of body parts. I do think that that's important. And then the kids have to learn that those are words that we don't speak on the playground. Those are not words that we use, out and about, but that's a science lesson in the home kind of a thing. So one of the words that we maybe teach is the word intimate. And maybe, now this depends on a lot, but maybe we teach that the husband and wife connect in a very specific way that God created. So if girls and boys, if you're raising sons and daughters and they're beginning to ask about body parts, why does my brother have that and I don't have that? Okay. If that's happening in your home, you can possibly then talk about the intimacy that God wants the husband and wife to have. This is one of the reasons that he created men and women differently. And this is one of the things that he has reserved for marriage, where you would marry somebody of the opposite gender and you would stay married forever if you're going to follow, God's best, God's way, and God's will for you and for your marriage. Yeah, and that's how babies are created, would be this intimate act of love. Now you can use the word love there. And it doesn't always happen. Not everybody who does that and wants a baby gets one. This is, again, God's wisdom, God's choice. We can wonder and we can debate, but again, he wins. So maybe you even include that kind of a thing. So again, Wayne, totally depends upon the situation. You don't do it with 7 kids in the room if they're not all ready for the same conversation. And I think we ask, why do you want to know? And maybe we share something and then we say, do you want to know more? But imagine kids looking up the word intimate, in a dictionary and having a conversation with you and your wife about that kind of love and that physical expression of love and how fulfilling it is in marriage and how different it is. And might that be a good thing for your kids to aspire to?
As Dr. Kathy and I were talking today, it reminds me of a passage, maybe it did for you too, out of Psalm 139. I'll read verse 13 and on. The psalmist writes, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place and when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. You saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them." This psalm really affirms God's intimate involvement in human life, long before any other structures existed, before family situations existed, even before circumstances are even considered. This passage is really especially important when thinking about how children are conceived in less than ideal or maybe even painful situations. Scripture never grounds a kid's worth in how they were conceived, but in who made them. And when kids later realize that they were given maybe a misleading explanation of how babies are formed because quote unquote love made you, and then they learn their story is way more complicated, it's natural that they might wrongfully conclude that something might be broken in them, or they might be even less meaningful. And so I think as parents, we need to step in to understand that the truth of how God has designed us to be created in the physical world is actually something that protects dignity. And we need to tell our kids about these things. Kids can handle reality when it's really framed with care. Something like every child is wanted by God, even when adults make broken or confusing choices. And we can help our kids to also then understand the beauty of the way that God's designed us to have relationships and how that leads forward to having other relationships. And it's a responsibility that we have to protect relationships because God is a God that intentionally builds relationships to go on and propagate more relationships. I think that something like that really does give our kids a picture of what it means to really be bearers of the image maker of God, but also to understand the beauty of how God's designed us. And having that framed out for them can be a bright light that can cut through some dark times that they might experience later on in life. I'm so thankful that you're joining us today here on the Celebrate Kids podcast, especially this daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Koch, my name is Wayne Stender. We're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.